Hi guys, and today is the second part of my tutorial series on shooting in low light. And just a quick recap, in the first video we talked about long exposure, where we're extending the shutter time to deal with night photography when we're looking at stationary objects, so buildings, street lights, all these things stationary, and it allows us to extend our shutter speed without there being any motion blur. But today's tutorial is completely different. It's about dealing with low light photography when we've got things moving, like people in an event. For example, I took my camera along to a naming ceremony or christening, and the church was dark, so I had a lot of decisions to make on whether I want to extend my shutter speed, open my aperture, raise the ISO. All these had to be considered. So let's start off again. So, lesson number 2. With low light photography, when you have moving subjects, you have to look at your exposure triangle. Always try and memorize your exposure triangle. So we have your shutter speed, your ISO, and your aperture. The shutter speed, the higher you raise it, the more you're able to freeze motion. The longer it is, the more motion blur you're going to get. So you know that's about your shutter speed. Your aperture, the more you open your aperture, the lower number, the more light you're going to let in, and the more shallow depth of field you're going to get, which means that you've only got a small distance between where your subject is going to be in focus to out of focus. So example, if I had a real shallow depth of field, now I focused on the nose, if it's really shallow, my eyes might be out of focus. That's just an example. So you've got a small distance, and the higher number you raise it, the smaller your aperture closes down to, which means you have a longer depth of field. It means more of your photo, more of the distance, you got a bigger distance where everything is going to be in focus. So you've got that to remember. So you've got to remember these things. And then you got your ISO, which raises the sensitivity of your sensor. But the higher you raise it, the more likely is you're going to introduce noise, that grainy effect in your picture. So those are the options you have. So when you have something like a christening or an event where it's low light and you have moving people moving, any sort of movement, the last thing you want, unless you do want to introduce blur specifically, but really generally the last thing you want is motion blur. You want your pictures of the people to be as crisp as possible. So what do? So you know, for one instant, you can't looking at your shutter speed, you can't lower your shutter speed too much, because you're going to include into your picture motion blur. Now, as I said in the last video, around 1/125th of a second is generally good for people moving around. It's not for fast moving objects like sports or fast cars. Well, anything above 1/125th of a second will generally keep everyone in focus and freeze the picture so there's no motion blur. So we know that. But what happens when we raise our shutter speed in low light environment? It means the picture's going to get darker. So we now have two options to get more light into the picture. So we have our aperture and our ISO. Now let's look at the aperture. We have, for example, we have a fast lens 1.4. So I open up my aperture right wide open to its max, and we've got a bright picture. But you're now looking at a very shallow depth of field, which means, for example, if you've got a group of people and one person standing behind the other and so on, the first person might be in focus, but this last person, the one behind them, will not. So you might not be able to have such a narrow depth of field, so you increase your aperture number, which means you close down the aperture. I know it's confusing, but if you're learning about aperture, but the higher the number, the smaller the aperture, the lower the number, the wider the aperture. It's just the way it is. So you don't want a shallow depth of field always, so you stop down your aperture, you make it smaller, which means again you're letting in less light and your picture is darker. So once again you're in a situation, you might be in a situation where you're in a low light environment and your picture is still dark. You've got 1/125th of a second to keep everyone frozen, so you haven't got motion blur, but you've got a situation where you've got a fast lens, but it's not going to work for you because you might have a group situation where people are behind one another and you can't use your shallow depth of field because the whole picture will be in focus. Now if you have one person, and you can get closer to them and you get the right shallow depth and it will match your right depth of field, you might be okay. You're doing a portrait, you might be okay, but if you're doing an event, it might not work out. So you stop down, let's say down to 5.6 to keep everyone in focus, or to 8. The picture's now dark, and again you want to get it correct in your camera, get the correct exposure. So it's way underexposed. So what do you do now? Well, all that's left for you, because if it's not enough light, remember your camera may not be able to focus, so you've got to get that point where your camera can focus in that low light environment. So what's left is your ISO. Now in the past with digital cameras, anything above 800 and plus was really grainy and it was unusable. Many cameras, anything above 1600 were completely unusable. My old Sony DSLR, if I went above 800 plus, it was really getting bad and it was no good for low light. Outside in daylight, fantastic camera. But modern sensors, you can increase your ISO. So you have your ISO to as your last option of letting the light in with moving subjects in low light environments. So you might stick your ISO up to 3000, 4000 until you get your right ISO. Now there are trade-offs. You can either lower your shutter speed and to let more in light, but you're going to have blur. Say you might not want blur, so that shutter speed has got to stay where it is, 1/125th of a second or above. So you've got no option to move there if you're looking for a sharp picture. Then let's look at the aperture. We can increase the aperture, but then we might not get a picture that's all in focus. So if that's important to us, we have to set our aperture a decent number that's going to get everything in focus. Let's, for example, mine is at 5.6. So we've discounted too much adjustment to shutter speed because we know we're going to get motion blur. We've discounted too much opening up of the aperture because we're not going to get the whole picture in focus. So what have we got? We got the ISO. If we want the picture to get the picture sharp and clear and in focus, we've got to look at the ISO. Modern cameras are pretty good, so you can raise the ISO. Perhaps you'll get a bit of grain, but the important thing is you'll get the picture. So you've got to decide what's important to you, whether you're worried about blur, whether you're worried about the whole picture being in focus, or whether you're worried about grain. For me, the least problematic option is having a bit of grain, so I raise my ISO to get enough light in, and so I can shoot at a decent enough, high enough shutter speed where everything is going to be in focus. If you have moving subjects, you've got to decide again, quickly run over what are your worst issues or problems that you want to overcome. I wanted to overcome blur, I wanted everything to be in focus, and I didn't mind having a bit of grain. So my ISO was my best option to get the best picture for the individuals. Anyway, that's me for now. I'm going to stick the pictures in, I'll put all the documents in. Right guys, well the last lesson is how to be creative with your camera in a low light environment, and I'll be looking to recreate this photo that's going to pop up next, and I'm going to go through on how I achieved that It's pretty easy, but it just shows you how to be creative, and we'll talk about other ways of being creative with moving cars and car trails and so on. So look out for that lesson, and it basically is a culmination of all the things you've learned in the first 2 lessons, putting them together with your camera to be creative. Anyway, I'm going to put the next tip that you should try for a week or so just to get you used to how the exposure triangle works. So that's for me for now. Hope you enjoyed the lesson, and look forward to the next lesson. I've got a couple of more reviews coming up, and hopefully I'll get to do the photo shoot that was cancelled due to bad weather at the end of the month, so keep a lookout for that. Anyway, I'm Jean, my voice getting croaky, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye.
Victims of the night, the chemical, physical kryptonite, helpless to the bass and fading lights. Oh, we were bound to get together, bound to get together. She took my arm, I don't know how it happened. We took the floor and she said, don't you dare look back. Just keep your eyes on me. I've seen you holding back. She said, shut up and dance with me. This woman is my destiny. She said, ooh, shut up and dance with me. Shut up and dance. A backless dress and some beat up sneaks. My discotheque, Juliet, teenage dream. I felt it in my chest as she looked at me. I knew we were bound to be together, bound to be together. She took my arm, I don't know how it happened. We took the floor and she said, don't you dare look back. Just keep your eyes on me. I seen you holding back. She said, shut up. Okay. Don't you dare look back. Just keep your eyes on me. I seen you holding back. She said, shut up and dance with me. This woman is my destiny. She said, ooh, shut up.
Oh hi, I didn't see you there. Well, I hope you liked the video, and if you want all the updates and when new videos come out, please do subscribe. Anyway, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.